Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Luis Fernandez. Fewer people are reaching for a glass of wine or a cocktail. A recent Gallup survey shows 54% of adults consume alcohol. That's down 10% from 10 years ago. Yet the roads aren't necessarily getting safer. In fact, keeping them safe is getting more complicated. Law enforcement agencies in North Carolina are trying to catch up to the changing landscape of impaired driving. WRAL Investigates Destinee Patterson spoke with Kenny Benfield, who is the head at the Forensic Test for Alcohol branch within the Division of Public Health. Here's their conversation.
How do you prove impairment beyond a reasonable doubt?
That's an excellent question.
When you think of a DWI charge, you usually are thinking of a 0.08 blood alcohol level. But as people's drinking habits change, law enforcement is adjusting. And soon, the results on cartridges like these could actually lead to charges.
There is so much more, and I say so much more, and it's not that it's prevalent now, it has been that way for years, that we have polysubstance use, so folks are using less alcohol. They're looking for alcohol alternatives, but they're also using less alcohol in addition to co-ingesting other drugs. So having the system is based upon an alcohol model. So everything that law enforcement does, everything that we've trained over the many decades has been related solely toward alcohol. So this is a tool to kind of bring folks in and look at what we see, and I say currently see, but we have been seeing probably for a good decade and a half that we have seen emerging polysubstance trends where folks are using more than one drug. And if they are ingesting alcohol, it's at lower levels.
So what are you guys seeing right now, and how do you guys handle testing for other types of drugs right now? Right
now, we used our field sobriety test or standardized field sobriety test or other testing that the officers do roadside. We have some additional advanced training because those standardized field sobriety tests are basically geared just toward alcohol. So we have what's called advanced roadside impaired driving enforcement training, which is a 16-hour course that trains officers to use those tests and some other tests and signs and symptoms to look for impairment that is related to drugs other than alcohol. After that, if they form their opinion of impairment, they can get a blood test that's sent off to the whatever crime lab they send it to. Or if they have one available, they can call a drug recognition expert.
The current process that's in place requires time.
Yes. And even to get those other tests and get a blood test, sometimes it may take 2-3 hours before they're able to get that blood test, just because of the time they get through processing and everything else.
And this takes?
I'll show you shortly, it takes about a minute and a half to get the sample and 5 minutes for it to analyze it. We just load this into the device, put it in my mouth, it's going to take about a minute. And it's about 5 minutes for it to analyze it.
Is it based off of how much? Because we know that alcohol has a 0.08, yes, and that's in the law. So how do you determine what is the level of impairment? And
this level is just based upon the cutoff level. Really, we can't say what that level is for each person because it's going to be different. Alcohol is as complicated sometimes as it seems. It's very simple. It reacts very similar in the body with everyone, whereas drugs don't do the same thing. So that level isn't going to say this is where everyone's going to be impaired at that level. So that's why it's so important to have that extra training for officers to have that so that they can show, hey, we saw impairment that's consistent with this drug category or this type of drug, and we have a positive here on that drug.
So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when I think of a DWI, if you have the 0.08, it's like you're automatically going to be charged with a DWI. But for this, you're saying that this is just a part of determining if somebody would be classified as a DWI.
Yes, and even with alcohol, officers are trained that we do that breath test at the end, that screening test. So they have already determined that the person is impaired. That screening test for alcohol pretty much just says, hey, this is alcohol. We know this is alcohol if it's the 0.8 or above. Sometimes some folks could be impaired less than 0.8, but we see this impairment where this would kind of supplement that. We saw that, hey, here's where we were. We saw no or very little alcohol, and this shows us whether they're positive are negative for that drug, at least within the cutoff levels.
Because we know that other states are already using devices like this, why is North Carolina now getting on the train to start using this technology?
Well, it's something it's been going on a while. We have looked at it. We've discussed it among partners. Recently, we've got a lot more information and a lot more interest from law enforcement, who obviously will be the ultimate user of it. The issue is, with everything, kind of comes down to funding on this. How's it going to work? What's the program look like? So I believe because so many of those states have those, we have a good idea of what, if we use this, what it would look like. Because that's kind of the reasoning behind it. Is it's great, it's not a magic bullet, it is just an additional tool to help with that process. Where does that need to be kind of injected into the process so that officers are able to make better decisions?
Some might look at this and say, well, it just is coming up as positive. How positive or negative? It's just coming up as positive or negative. So how do you combat situations where people might argue that they don't have something in their system, making sure that the system itself is not faulty and being able to prove impairment beyond a reasonable doubt? How do you prove impairment beyond a reasonable doubt?
That's an excellent question, and that's the main thing for us to understand. This is a screening device, so could there be cross-reactivity or something else? So we have to look at, is there false positive, could be false negatives. So what we want to look at is making sure, that's why we need that training. Officers have the training, they establish this person is impaired, so that they say, hey, this person, we've already established that, then let's see what they're impaired on. For two things, that way they're not going down and spending another hour and a half going to get a breath test when they need a blood test, and vice versa, same thing with alcohol. So it kind of gives them time, saving time in the process, and gives them something to, sometimes, a lot of times, because it's not just like folks are using one drug, they're using several different drugs or categories of drugs. It gets very complicated into saying, hey, what am I looking at? What do I have? So this is just an extra step to give more information for that officer to make an informed decision. So we want them to have that impairment first and collect that. Then they'll get this, then they'll collect the evidential that will then come in later to help beyond a reasonable doubt. So this should be to help with the probable cause part of it.
I talked to you about Kava. We know that Kratom has also grown in popularity. How would a device like this be able to address some of those gaps in drugs that may be not as laid out as some of the others here? Or would it not be able to do that?
And this one wouldn't check for those, so that's kind of the downside of it, is it's hard to even check for all the drugs and keep up even at crime labs that do this. So we'll probably never have something, because it changes so quickly, that we'll never have something to test for everything. So that's why it's so important to be able to have those roadside tests to say, hey, this person is impaired, now let's look and see what they're impaired on, because we want to make sure it's not a medical issue, not a mental health issue, that it's an issue related to some impairing substance. So that's what it helps get that better decision on. While this doesn't cover everything, it covers those main drugs that we do see, because even with Kava and Kratom and some of those other drugs, we do see co-ingestion of some drugs that would test positive with this.
Thank you to Destinee for that conversation, and thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Find the latest North Carolina news on our YouTube page. Just search WRAL. Be sure to like and subscribe. And another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.